Hello, hero, and well met. Welcome to my shop. So you have a nice, full sack of coin. You've come here looking for something, I see. Maybe something to, help in combat. A fine mystical sword from another realm. Crossed seas untold to men to get here. No? Not so much for you, eh? Well, that's fine. Let me see here. Oh! How about a nice wand? Something to enhance your sorcerer's powers, perhaps, eh? Not so much there, eh? Alright, well... How about something to give you sight beyond sight? The sorcerer's own gaze. Be able to peer through the mists of time. When you come into a shop like mine, know that magic is capable of doing almost anything. And almost anything is what you could find here in the Lair of OmnusI. You have failed me for the last time. Hi, I'm OmnusI. Welcome to the Lair of OmnusI. Round 2. Later. Heroes, and welcome to the Lair of OmnusI. We are here in response to a question that I have received from a player who was put in an interesting position, one that not all players get a chance at. This is in a fantasy game, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And this player was confronted not with dire challenge or perhaps skullduggery from their own party or things like that. No, it was a completely different challenge, one many players long to have. This player's character had a great deal of money in their pocket and were presented with a shop that sold magical items. However, this player may have lacked some experience and didn't know what they wanted. So this particular episode of the Lair of OmnusI is going to concentrate on what to do with all of that wealth, especially when it comes to magical items in a magical world. Now, you'll be able to take this information and possibly extrapolate it to other game systems. For instance, what happens if, say in Star Wars, you steal an Imperial locker completely full of credits and find yourself at a black market space station that has thousands of items, many of which aren't technically in any book you've seen. Concepts are generally the same. Ways of doing things that you couldn't do before by the application of a little money. But sometimes it can seem to be an incredibly large universe, and if your experience isn't as incredibly vast, it can be very intimidating. So, let's jump right into the subject of dealing with the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. This particular episode has a few caveats to it. It won't be to everyone in the audience, possibly, for the simple reason that not all campaigns ever get to a point where a character has a great deal of money and has an access to a magical shop of some place that they can buy the kind of things their characters might want that aren't something that can be commonly crafted or even crafted by an excellent smith. We're talking about magic, items of power, rare resources, prototypes, and things of that nature. Now, there are games that are so stingy that the players will never feel like they have those kind of resources. Or ones that purposefully have wealth drains put upon the group. For instance, breaking equipment that has to be replenished, taxes that are continuously gathered upon any wealth that's been obtained. There are a variety of ways of taking care of excess finances that game masters have been using for ages. And once you actually succeed and you have something that is the sum of a great deal of wealth, sometimes that becomes its own money drain as well. Try owning a castle sometime. You not only have to maintain it, which, once it's shiny and new, it may seem like it'll be there forever, but anybody who's been into a ruin knows that time has a way of taking down even the grandest of structures. So yes, you have to maintain it, but more importantly, to enjoy any of the benefits of a castle, you have to staff it. And that involves a great deal of money that is expensed outward to pay for the people who are going to do the day-to-day work to keep your castle going. And also, you're going to need an income stream, so you're going to have to start managing the peasants who bring you goods to pay for everything, and all of the other ways of getting taxes so that you can basically not be spending out of your own pocket to take care of all of the needs of the castle. Ideally, you're going for sustainability. And again, this applies whether or not you have a grand spaceship, or that castle, or a covert military operation that operates from a undocumented tropical island. What have you. There are ways of making sure that when players have all the money they think they need, that they find out that that money can go away just as quickly through day-to-day expenses. But we're not talking about that. We're talking the players have had the big score. It doesn't even have to be a tremendous amount of money. Say, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, if you have more than 1,000 gold pieces, the list of things that you could really want and need after that is, well, not a great deal. Looking through the list of equipment, the weapons, the armor, you're already going to have your choice of armor, probably. You're already going to have your choice of weapon, and possibly several backups. You're going to have just the gear that you wanted managed out. Possibly if you have encumbrance issues, it might limit what you can have and what you can't have. But after that point, it becomes, what do I do with the extra wealth? First of all, you may not be tired of lugging it around. Unless there are concrete and safe banks in your world, someplace to store your coffers, well, that's an ongoing issue. So spending it so that you can carry around something of real use or worth, well, that becomes an important thing to a very successful adventurer. But we're not going to deal with the financial issues at the moment. We're just concentrating on a hero, a sack of coin on their shoulder, and presented in front of them is a magic shop. Again, not all worlds have magic shops, and again, this magic shop can be representative of a black market bazaar of high technology or some other resource for getting things beyond what you can just find from the item list on your player's book. Almost all games have something of this manner, and if they don't, oftentimes the Game Master will come up with things like that. Something shiny to interest your players is always a good attraction for Game Masters, giving the players something to work for, in addition to accomplishing their goals, of course. It's always nice to find a little upgrade here, or something that can give them a new ability, or new power, or cover a weakness, or give them a new strength. These are things that players often long for, even if the game itself isn't one that seems to lend itself to having such abilities and advantages. If you're playing, for example, a game of espionage, well, anybody remember James Bond? When he'd go out on a mission, one of the first things he'd do was check in to see what kind of new gadgets he could get access to. Many of them pretty clever. Well, adventuring is kind of like that. You always want that new extra gadget that might give you a new ability, or the ability to go someplace you weren't able to before. Maybe the ability to survive something that otherwise would be pretty hairy. So, the temptation for a Game Master to have something like a magic shop in their world is strong. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be a shop of magic. An alchemist shop, for instance, might have wonders that the players would love to throw their wealth into, depending on how diverse your alchemy is in your world. Perhaps you have a gnomish tinker shop with all kinds of wonders there. All of a technological bent without very much magic. Just saying, there are possibilities to entice your players to spend their money that they've gotten through a very successful horde of adventuring. So if you get to that point, you are that hero, you are standing in front of the strange shop with a thought to spend your wealth on such a place. What do you do? Well, there's a few options, and we're going to go into those. First of all, and possibly the least satisfying to some game masters, some of them just surrender their book to the players so that they can see all of the items lined up that might be available. They assume that the shop has the resources for many, if not all, of the items that might be in their book that has all of the prizes that can be given out, all the magical items, all the high-tech items, and it becomes a shopping list for the players. There's a lot of game masters who have a real issue with this, however. For them, that book is their book. It is not something for giving to the players to shop out of. And as a matter of fact, some of the earliest game guides, I seem to remember the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, suggested that if they caught players peeking into the Dungeon Master's Guide, they were encouraged to make an example out of the player that they caught doing it. This means horribly killing their character because they were looking in the Dungeon Master's Guide. That was not for players. They were not allowed to look behind the curtain. Now, whether or not that held true at every table, no. I certainly belonged to tables that the Dungeon Master's Guide was in the player's pocket just as much as the player's handbook seemed to be. And it's good to have goals sometimes, so if your players know what they're looking for, know what is out there and available, it may seem to satisfy one of the problems of a Dungeon Master. Simply that you don't have to come up with anything if you have a nice, neat list that you can hand to your players. Now, giving them the powers, abilities, and everything that those items can do, especially to younger players, sometimes that may seem to be the revelation that you are looking for to whet their appetites. If they look through the potions and they're like, oh, potion of levitation, I bet that makes me levitate, and they'd be right. But there's some items in there that don't enjoy the amount of self-explanation by their description. And in those items, if you, a rod of lordly might, I wonder what that does. Now, if the Dungeon Master clamps down on the descriptions and all they say is, well, it's a masterful-looking rod, it looks very grand, and don't tell them the powers, the players might wonder why it's worth X number of gold. And perhaps that might give them a sense of wonder and excitement that pulling the curtain away to show them the list of items and the prices might not give. But again, many game masters have an issue with this. They like the sense of a world and its bounties being in their control. So if they even deign to have a magic shop, they don't necessarily want the players to have the list of all the magical items. Some editions of Dungeons & Dragons de-emphasize this to a great extent. I would posit that the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons, with its many slots that characters can stuff magical items into, much like a video game MMO, where you have all these different places that you can put gear of ascending levels of power, the game could very easily turn into a giant shopping list where you were definitely aiming for particular items to enhance your characters in the way that you foresaw. Perhaps, to a certain extent, this came from the very roots of the game, the earliest days when players were allowed in some groups to look at the Dungeon Master's Guide and see all of the things that were available. Or in a game like Star Wars, for instance, the D6 system from West End Games, they had whole books of great new technology. Shadowrun had the Street Samurai's catalog. I loved that book. So many good things in there. And I just enjoyed reading it because the dialogue boxes that were in each item were great at building the world and hilarious in places. So this idea of having a resource such as the Dungeon Master's Guide or a separate book to give the players more that they can look forward to than just the limited number of items of gear that are in the player's handbook seems awfully attractive. But if you want to preserve that sense of wonder, then perhaps giving a shopping list like that might not be to your taste. Again, there's no right way to run games. And for some people, the idea of actually having a list of items for their players, and even if their players understand what each of the items do, maybe that's fine for their game and the players that they have. Now, I personally choose to take that scenario and treat it as a role-playing exercise. Another chance to get in some good role-play. If that player takes their character, walks up to the door, and summons up the courage to take their sack of coins and walk in through the door, I'm not one to say, no, what do you want? What do you want? Because, number one, if this player is inexperienced, they don't know what they want. They don't know what's out there. And even for veterans, sometimes the idea that anything they want comes down to how much it costs and can they afford it is not the most attractive option. Now, as a game master, my instinct would be to describe in a broad panorama all the things that the characters can see. The various shiny objects, the sleek weapons, the mysterious orbs and concoctions, the racks of different potions and variety of bottles and substances within, the odd bits of cloth that seem to form somewhat recognizable objects, or the carvings and statuettes that throb with magical power. Descriptions of the things that immediately pop out to the eye, and you don't have to item by item describe everything. The things that catch the player's eye, or the character's eye, more to the point, are the things that are important to bring to the attention of the characters. A warrior, for example, walking into a shop that generally just provides a great deal of magical items, their eyes are going to light on armor, weapons, perhaps a thing or two that might stand out as something that could be useful, would definitely take precedence over some dumb-looking statue that they have no idea how to use or activate, or many of the items that they could never use. So, if you're walking into a small magical store that you have, say, half a dozen items that would work for a warrior, the player could walk in and say, well, there's a large halberd that's suspended from hooks over on the corner, and a brief description. There's a few suits of armor on armor racks that are presented as if, for your consideration. There's a variety of potions and some interesting inscriptions. And you could describe that and entice the player to move forward and look at things. Then, again, using this as an opportunity for roleplay, have somebody approach the character. Obviously, you're not going to have items of power that are just hanging around with nobody keeping an eye on them. Everybody who comes into a magic shop should have some sort of a shopkeeper or a servant to the shopkeeper who immediately goes and guides the character to items that might interest them. They'd be very good at eyeing up a prospective client or customer and guiding them along. Perhaps they even work on commission, similar to a car salesman of some sort, or a jewelry store clerk. So, you can, as the game master, take an opportunity to roleplay with a less experienced player and guide them into the kind of things that might help them out. Especially since, as a game master, you've seen them struggle. You know the kind of things that they've been challenged by in the past. Even if the player doesn't think, well, my character was charmed in that last combat, and it was a terrible experience. I couldn't control my character and do the things I wanted to do. When that character goes into the magic shop, it's probably fairly fresh in their characters might, even if the player may have forgotten, but that's a horrible experience that they don't want to repeat. So if you happen to have something that might give them a boost against such mental intrusion in the future, that certainly might be something they'd be interested in, and a good clerk might be able to steer them towards something like that. In that way, the Game Master can subtly take the hand of the player and show them some interesting things that make the world seem more magical and larger and more expansive. Likewise, that clerk would not be very good if they could not somewhat sum up the means of the character and steer them away from things that are vastly more expensive, although dropping one or two of those very expensive items to give them a sense of proportion in the world and what the economy is like can also be useful for setting the world. But when it comes down to it, choosing something is a lot like going grocery shopping. If you go grocery shopping for yourself, you might go in with certain needs that you know you have to fill. You might have a recipe that you are getting the ingredients for. You may have staples that you need to buy, like milk and eggs and bread. You may have certain things that you know that are useful to you in a variety of recipes, so you just want to get, like cans of some sort of cream of something soup that you can use in a variety of things. You might get those things. And then as you're traveling through, you might see, oh, that's something that I need. And impulsively, or, there's a certain level of guise and wit about how things can be arranged. You can be led along aisle by aisle and tempted to take the things that you would want, maybe not need, but want, and end up choosing those things as well when you shop. Similarly, a magical shop might work on similar principles, although, of course, the clientele for magical items is going to be much, much narrower than a store that sells goods that everyone needs. But still, they are going to have an arrangement of things so that the more common items that everybody who'd go into a magical shop could afford would be towards the back, letting you go buy all of these really expensive items that draw your attention and make you think, okay, if I get this much money, I'm going to come here and get that, because that would be wonderful for me to have. Show a few items. Show off the power and the wonder of what your world is capable of. My alter ego Rob wrote this adventure about being in a magical pawn shop. He created 100 magical items. Created, as in not borrowed from something else, or they were new and unique. And letting the players go in and know that they're in a place with all of these items that they have no idea what the powers are. Just a few descriptions here and there for those who are interested. All of a sudden, they realized there's real power here. There is immense variety, and magic is not something that's codified and cut up into little bottles and stuck into boxes. It's not just a +1 sword on every doorstep. It's a sword that we don't know what it does. We'd have to research it and understand the lore behind it and the story, and then we might be able to understand what it does. Or maybe after handling it, possibly buying it themselves, they might actually understand why it's so treasured. Just like anything, you'd want to do your research on that and give the players an opportunity to understand what they're buying, certainly. But do you want to make your magic wondrous? Do you want to make it mysterious? Do you want to make it seem like it is available in just a way of expanding what is available from your characters? Increasing their powers, abilities, where they can go and where they can't go, protecting them from dangers that they know they're susceptible to, or perhaps giving them an entirely different power set that they can fall back on. Well, that all depends on how you want to run your game. So, yes, that is basically the ways that I have come through to understand many people use. You can just give them the list and let them pick from it. You can show show with your words what the character is looking at and get them to engage, ask questions. And as a player, you don't need to know everything if your Game Master is on point and understands where you're coming from. It's all right to say, you know, I don't know what any of this is. I don't even know what I need. All I know is magical items are better than non-magical items, and I know that I want to get better at what I do. And if you told a clerk in a magical store something like that to a DM who knows how to roleplay and knows how to draw roleplay challenges out of players, then that clerk can be used as a tool, much like a browser on the internet. I am interested in this. What have you got? And then open up a dialogue. Say, well, I have this and this and this. This might work for you. If the clerk isn't very good, there might be a few, let's just say, pitfalls in that selection. Maybe something that isn't quite to the best of the character's interests. But, more often than not, a person who is successful at running a magic shop should be helpful, should be able to eye up their clients and their customers and find the correct items for them to fulfill a need that that character has. If you're a player with a big sack of money and you want to buy into magical items, you should be honest with yourself and think, what do I really need? In the last encounters that I have I been able to handle the combat no problem? Have I been taking extra damage that I didn't want to take? Did somebody attack me in a certain way that I didn't feel like I could handle that situation? A lot of times that's what magical items are there for. They're there to prop up areas where you aren't as strong. They're there to help bridge gaps that otherwise you might not be able to cross. Many of them also are items that have many different uses. Sometimes, as clever as you can be, the magical item gets more use. For instance, I believe there was a rod of inertia, one that, or an immovable rod, perhaps is a better term for it. A rod, nearly indestructible, that you can activate and it becomes stuck in space. You can use it, put it in front of a door, lock it, and that door is not going anywhere. They'd have to physically destroy the door to get in. That's a great idea. Or that's a great idea and a great item. However, getting two of those, and you can have a ladder that can support your weight and anybody else who's along for one person. As long as you can hang by your arms, you could use that to get up spaces, and if you have two, you could take one, put it below so that you can rest on your feet while you're holding on to one. Theoretically, you could climb just about any height with something like that. And there's any number of uses for a rod of inertia. My favorite one was while we were being pursued by a pack of riders. While we were riding ourselves, let the opponents get right on my tail, turn around, activated the movable rod, and my lead pursuer caught it with his chest, was knocked off the horse because it wasn't moving and he did, and tangled up the whole pursuit. Later on, I went back and got the rod because they didn't know how to deactivate it and take it themselves. But it proved to be very useful in that situation. And the cleverness that players get with getting disparate magical items can sometimes be a reward for the game master. It's fun to watch your players come up with all kinds of crazy things to do with the things you give them. That is some of the reasoning behind some game masters being what one could dub a Monty Hall DM, which is an old term. Monty Hall, of course, was a game show host from Let's Make a Deal, and notorious for people who come onto the show just dressed in wacky costumes, who are presented with the opportunity to get wealth and prizes for no great skill, just randomness. And that a lot of times appealed to some game masters, the idea of the players are playing, as long as they're playing, I'm going to keep giving them rewards, sometimes ones they didn't seem to earn. Kind of a disparaging term for a lot of game masters, because again, their players are seen to not earn the treasures that they have. But it can be fun to let your players have access to lots of different things and play around with all the crazy and kooky ideas that you've come up with. I may be guilty of doing that from time to time myself. So, in terms of guiding your players, and as a player coming into a situation like that, enjoy the wonder, enjoy the magic. If it seems limiting, like a +1 sword is just a better sword, there doesn't necessarily anything that looks all that magical about it. It's just a sword that works better than the sword you have. Well, then magic becomes a little less wondrous. If it is a sword that, even though it does not make you more powerful as a warrior, but it allows you as, say, if you're a rogue, some stealthy fellow who likes to slide through the shadows, who has an ability that if you strike an unaware foe, you can do extra damage because you know just where to hit with that weapon. And normally, you need to work with allies to get that ability. You need to distract your foe. But this particular sword, if you attack a foe with advantage when they don't know you're there, when you go to make another strike, the sword starts to blur in the vision of the one who was hit, so that they can't defend themselves, so that your next attack is also at advantage, even if you have no allies around you. As a rogue, that can make you far more dangerous. Even though it gave you an ability that you would already have just by having another person around. Instead, you are a little more self-reliant. I didn't give you a weapon that made you that much more powerful. I allowed you to use your power more often than you would, and that makes that weapon even more magical. To the point where a player who was given just that sword, even when he had the opportunity to use a magical +1 sword of the same type, chose not to. He was happy with that short sword of scintillation that I gave him, and used it even after some magical items had come about that might have given him more combat performance. He liked that one because it freed him to use his abilities more often, and that was a great reward in itself. And that's just one example. Quite honestly, I'm sure you have your own ideas out there, and creating magical items in these games is often very easy. Just come up with an effect that you like and assign a worth to it. And if you do that and you keep the players guessing, your magic becomes more magical. If all the world is just full of +1, +2, +3 swords, it's a kind of a bleak world. You're just upgrading performance. But if you have swords that have special abilities, as common as the +1 sword, that you can find items that have unique little abilities and tricks and tips that make that item more unique and memorable, well, that's going to make your world that much more magical. Don't feel as a player that you drown in a world of vast possibilities. It's easy to do, quite honestly. When you're new to the game, especially if you're with a group of more experienced players, and they all chatter happily about what they intend to get, it makes the fact that you aren't as experienced seem an overwhelming obstacle. But if your game master is any good, just allow yourself the luxury of role-playing out a scenario. They've all had their turns if you are with such experienced players. Take up a little bit of the time, a little bit of the spotlight, and go to that clerk and say, I need something to do something. Just explore from that avenue, something that you'd be interested in. If you're not satisfied with your damage output, then there's probably something that'll help you there. If you saw one of your allies do something cool, or if you saw one of your enemies do something cool, and you decide you want to do that thing too, talk to your magic shop dealer. Talk to your friends. Maybe they know something that might be able to achieve the effect you're looking for. Explore the world. Crawl around in it. Look under the rocks. Kick the tires. By doing that, you'll increase your knowledge of what's out there. But more to the point, you'll be satisfied in role-playing it out. As your character grows, so you grow. And if you're a game master out there and you're listening to this, be mindful of your players. If you're going to give them avenues to new power, new abilities, show responsibility with that. It does subtly change the game if treasures, magical items and such, aren't just the unique reward that you get for risk-taking, for danger. If it becomes something that you can just buy, well, treat your world the way that you want your world to come out. If you want magic to be something you buy off the rack, there's nothing wrong with that. I have a world that does that. But give it a purpose. Give it a reason. Make it real in your world, and your characters will pass that on to their players. If the characters are blown away with wonder at what you reveal, that'll spread to the players too, and they'll be excited about these opportunities that they have. Also remember, don't always show everything. And players, be aware, your Dungeon Master may not show you everything. Reserve some things so that you can progressively show the world expanding and ultimately new vistas for the players to reach for. If you do that, your world will have sustainability. It'll keep the players interested in seeing what's that next thing that they could get access to. If you've ever played a role-playing game, video game, and you know that when you get to the next town there will be more shops that will have unique items that you didn't have access to before, oh sure, they'll have a lot of the old ones, but all of a sudden, this new weapon for this fighter, or this new staff for this wizard, bear in mind, that's a conscious choice that was made in that design, and that's something you can use in your own games too, by not showing everything. Starting off relatively small and expanding outward, you don't overwhelm your players. You give them choices that are within their range and just a little bit beyond to whet their appetite, and build on that. Magical shops can be a challenge for a game master. Sometimes if you aren't prepared and you just let your players go into a magic shop, that can be a challenge. Keeping it magical enough can be a challenge. But with a little forethought, you can make these things a real reward for the players. Number one, they get to spend the resources that they've earned, which is good. Number two, you build on the world by showing what's possible and what's out there. You excite your players by the rewards that they see themselves getting in the future and realized in the moment. The first time, if the players walk into a magic shop and they see this suit of +3 celestial armor, and they're just coming off of their apprenticeship, they don't have hardly any coin, but they see this armor, it's got stylized wings coming out of the shoulders, and it's gleams, and it's got all the etching and things that really make it stand out. And the paladin walks up to it and says, "That will be mine someday." Think how much more special it is on the day that they can finally realize that, when they suddenly know, I have the money now to get that item. It's another thing that you give your players to look forward to. And as a player, it's fine to dream about getting cool things like that, and imagining your character someday wearing something cool like that, or wielding that weapon that you saw and thought that was so cool. Magical shops have a place in many games. Not all. In many games, though. And, again, magical shops, Decker's Havens and Shadowrun, black markets, so on and so forth. Any resource that you use to give new things to your players, you have a real opportunity to build your world as a game master and to expand your understanding of the world that your characters find themselves dwelling in as a player. So, those are the opportunities that a magic shop provides. If you choose to use it well, and it'll make your world a little bit richer. If you choose not to use it, well, that's fine. You've just made those items that the people find along in their daring do that much more precious, because they can't be obtained in other ways. And I'm not saying that's a bad way of doing things. It's just a different way. So, bear in mind that some players will expect or will look out for something like that. They'll look for the magic shop because they've played video games, or they've been in other campaigns, or they just imagine that if somebody goes through and can make these magical items, or somebody retires after a successful career of adventuring and just wants to sell their items, that somehow these things can be available for coin, the right price, or a quest, or some such, driving more adventure. In the end, sometimes that's what the players need a little bit to keep them going forward, is those promises of rewards. So, anyway, I hope this has stimulated some thought, some ideas, and ways of approaching the game that you play and hopefully enjoy. Speaking of treasure, though, almost anything that you find through your wanderings through life can be used in one way, shape, or form in a game. Some things may seem ubiquitous and therefore not worthy of consideration, but I think you've seen through some of the treasures that I've provided that odd bottles and scraps and bits can be used in games. Even other games can be used in games sometimes. But sometimes you'll find deals. You'll find something so inexpensive that if you could but find a purpose to it, it would be something that you would be interested in. I hold up for Exhibit A this cute little bank. Yes, that's Cthulhu. And it's a bank. It's got a slot somewhere. Oh, right in the back. On his shoulder. I use this. It's over my mini fridge. And my players, if they're interested, can buy a soda off me. 50 cents. I don't gouge them or anything. But, I just ask to have a little bit of money so that they can restock the fridge from time to time if they've been drinking out of it. And it's got that use at the very least. But if you think about it, something like this, I got this for next to nothing. My local hobby shop ended up getting like a dump truck full of these things, so they were practically giving them away. So got a hold of this little horror, and a couple of things come to mind immediately. This is glow in the dark, which that's cute. But more to the point, with something like this, it is an ideal size for something that you might find in your adventures. Not a plastic hollow one with coins in it. Although maybe it could. Certainly, I guess. But, again, this could be something, a treasure of some sort, that your players find. If you were to, say, I don't know, get a can of gold spray paint and all over, you could have this golden statuette of Cthulhu. And goodness knows there are enough debased cults, and now in 5th edition there are warlocks that follow the great old ones, that, yes, in a D&D world, Cthulhu, you could find this as a treasure. And if it's made out of gold, it could be worth some real money, even if the players just melt it down. But the thing is, with something from this mythos, you could find something like this in a game of Shadowrun. There might be people who actually think that the whole Lovecraft thing is got merit, and with the spirits that you can talk to as shamans, or as the arcane elementals, that the idea that there's something beyond, maybe that could be worshipped and brought into the real world to smite your foes, or something like that. Something like this could exist in almost any genre, is what I'm saying. Now, how often is it useful to actually have a physical object of the treasure the players might find? Well, it can be very useful. It helps to evoke a mood, a mindset, to bring your players into your game mentally a little bit more. They can handle something that's a treasure that they find in the game, especially if it's repulsive and kind of grotesque. They realize just how repulsive and grotesque these things are that they're fighting and so on. And that also helps to capture the imagination. With something like this, you might be tempted to get a couple of those little tiny fake gemstones, even at those little adhesive bling stones, and put them alongside the tentacles here for eyes. I can see that. I can see that very easily. Now, as a game master, having a prop like this is great for the players. It can also be good for the game master as well. Because if you take this and you make something determinate on how the players handle said object, you put this on the table and say, no, if you're going to take it, and you watch how a player picks it up. Maybe if he grasps it by the wings, perhaps a special effect happens. Maybe there's only one safe way to hold it up. Underneath a pedestal that it stands on, perhaps. Anything above that, and you can get a shock, a jolt, a curse may be put upon you. If you look it in the eyes, perhaps that invokes another curse. Perhaps if your cat attacks your recording, that's a curse. You are a pain. I've only been doing this for how long? You only now realize that I'm down here? So with treasure items like these, the show, don't tell becomes something that you can shoot for. You can, I'm not saying go on the level of a live action role play. See, I hold it up and I am cursed with the presence of a feline who has very little regard for my recording. Hello everybody. Say hi to Magic. Hello Magic. How are you? She's happy enough. So yes, the idea of a treasure that your players can handle, bringing them into the game in a very real way, can be very useful and an effective technique by a game master who has not limitless resources, but when life gives something to you that you see, that you can get an idea for, then even thrift stores, garage sales, closeouts, and clearances become fertile ground for getting new material. Okay, be that way. For your games. Something that I've always held to. You can be a game master on a very, very, very small amount of money, putting out new and better experiences all the time, just by what you happen to find along the way. So, hopefully this helps. And for all of that, I thank you for joining me today. I am, of course, OmnusI, the Lion of Role-Playing Games, and I am here to, once more, thank you for joining me. And hopefully next time, Magic will enlighten us with her presence in a positive way, and we can plumb new ground and a new level here in the Lair of OmnusI. Thank you. Farewell.